Greetings from Manchester, everyone. Today we have teachers, academics, psychologists, guidance counselors, educational leaders, parents, and emotion enthusiasts all gathered for this virtual meeting with Dr. Daniel Goleman. It's a pleasure to come through the organization of the Sıtkı Alp Education Foundation. We're honored to host such a meaningful event on the 40th anniversary of our schools in the 100th year of Republic of Turkey. As we're beginning the seminar, I want to take the opportunity to introduce my co-pilot, Aybars Önder, my former classmate from Ara Anatolian High School IB Diploma Program, International Philosophy Organization 2020 champion, who's currently in Princeton studying philosophy, and is highly anticipated to get a Nobel delegation. It's an honor to introduce him to you. I'm now passing the mic to him. Aybars, it's so nice to see you. Been a while.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the warm introduction, Seyden. It was very nice to see you again. Hello, everyone. I want to introduce my co-moderator, Seyden Demiros. Seyden and I are both graduates of ARA's IB Diploma Program. While I found myself in the United States after graduation, Seyden went to Manchester, UK, to study neuroscience. Her research interests intersect with emotional intelligence. Seyden, as I said, it's lovely to see you again. I'd like to welcome you again to our webinar titled Empowering Minds. Today's discussion will be about the role of schools in fostering emotional intelligence, self-discipline, and social skills for student success. The webinar will consist of a talk by Dr. Goleman, followed by a Q&A session. You can type in your questions down in the Q&A section, and we will ask them to Dr. Goleman so long as time permits. I'll now hand off the mic to Dr. Seva Demiros. Dr. Demiros is a member of the Board of Trustees of the Sıtkı Alp Educational Foundation and the Vice General Director of our schools.
Thank you very much, Aybars. I would also like to extend a hearty welcome to our esteemed guest, Dr. Goleman, and all the participants present here today. As we commemorate the 40th anniversary of our schools, it's indeed an honor to have Dr. Goleman among us, sharing his invaluable knowledge with the audience from Turkey and beyond. Dear participants, in a world where life is becoming increasingly complex, the limitations of IQ in defining an individual are more apparent than ever before. We as educators have to realize that academic success and intellectual capital are not enough for life success and self-actualization of the individual. To nurture our students and empower them to lead fulfilling and successful lives, it's imperative that we have to adopt an educational approach that focuses on holistic development, where the mind and heart are harmoniously united. In the era of artificial intelligence, we should realize that emotional intelligence and social emotional learning are critical values. That's why we strongly believe that the outcomes of this meeting will greatly contribute to enhancing our communication and interaction with children and young people, as well as improving our classroom practices. Therefore, let us all attentively listen to Dr. Goleman's words as he guides us on this enlightening journey.
I'll introduce Dr. Goleman. Dr. Daniel Goleman is an American psychologist and author of the New York Times bestseller Emotional Intelligence. He's often ranked as one of the most influential business thinkers, and his article, What Makes a Leader, has been the most requested reprint in the history of Harvard Business Review. For 25 years, he was co-director of the Consortium for Research on Emotional Intelligence in Organizations. Harvard University's Graduate School of Arts and Science has awarded him as an outstanding graduate. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Daniel Goleman.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and I'm delighted to be able to share my thinking with my friends in Turkey. I very much admire the educational approach that your school exemplifies. I'm going to talk about the role of emotional intelligence in success. And when I say success, I don't mean just academic success, I mean success in life, success over the course of your career. My model, Selin, if you could put the first slide up, please.
Yes.
Is it there? I can't see it. Yes.
One moment, please.
While Selin is getting that, no, actually the slide above that, Selin,
Yeah.
not this one.
Sorry.
There are many models of emotional intelligence since Peter Salovey, who's now the president at Yale, proposed the idea, but most everyone agrees on these 4 parts. The first is self-awareness, knowing what you're feeling, knowing how those feelings shape your perceptions, your thoughts, and your impulse to act. And then self-management, or you might say self-discipline, which has to do with not only knowing what you feel, but being able to manage them well. And I'll go into that in a little more detail a little later. Social awareness, particularly empathy, knowing what other people are feeling, and then putting that all together in relationship management or social skill to have effective relationships. Those are the 4 parts. But at the outset, it's important to realize that IQ, cognitive abilities, is very different from emotional intelligence. And they're not the same. They're based in different parts of the brain. And IQ, of course, is the best predictor of school success, but it turns out it's not a very good predictor of career success. I had a professor back in my graduate school days at Harvard, David McClellan, who proposed that instead of looking at IQ or grades, we should look at competence. What he meant by that was an ability that makes someone in the workplace a star performer. And now competence models are pretty standard in world-class organizations everywhere. But it's important to understand that in a competence model, that is a set of competencies that make someone outstanding here in this sector, in this company. When you look at that, you're seeing that IQ and technical skills are what are called threshold abilities. Everybody needs them to get a job. But what distinguishes someone, what makes someone a star performer or a leader, is emotional intelligence, competencies based on these 4 domains. I'll go into what those competencies look like in a little bit, but I want to tell you about a study that was done at a global manufacturing company among engineers. Engineers were asked to rate each other on how effective they were as engineers. And it turned out that effectiveness as an engineer had nothing to do with IQ. There was no correlation. And instead, it was highly correlated with emotional intelligence, how you manage yourself, self-awareness, self-management, and how you handle your relationships, social awareness, relationship management. That determined how able someone was in engineering. And I suspect that the threshold for IQ among engineers is very high, which means that it doesn't help you. Everyone else is about as smart as you are. That's why they're engineers. But in order to be outstanding, you need this other set of people skills. Social emotional learning is an educational program that teaches children this skill set. And there's very good data. There's one meta-analysis that involved more than 250,000 students who were taking social emotional learning courses compared to those who weren't. And they found that SEL, as it's called, social emotional learning, produced a 10% increase in pro-social behavior, liking school and behaving well, reduced antisocial behavior, getting in trouble, misbehaving, reduced it by 10%. And interestingly, on academic achievement tests, children with SEL had an 11% increase or advantage in their scores. So it not only helps children, teenagers be better behaved, it helps them learn better. There are many, many programs in SEL now. You can look at a roundup, impartial roundup of them at CASEL, the Collaborative for Academic Social and Emotional Learning, casel.org, O-R-G is the website. It was founded at Yale University, then moved to the University of Illinois at Chicago. And it's found that the very best, the most effective SEL programs teach the whole spectrum of emotional intelligence, self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship management. They do it in ways that are developmentally appropriate. I'll give you an example of that. And they involve families too. It's not just something that kids learn at school. It's something that they take home and that parents also help with. Now, developmentally appropriate means you teach the same thing over and over as children grow and as their cognitive abilities increase. So for example, this is an American actual example. In second grade, you might, this is for 7-year-olds, you might say, imagine that someone stole your crayon or your pencil. What would help and what would hurt? And then the children discuss this amongst themselves, and the teacher guides them to understanding what would be a better response. In 5th grade, maybe a 10-year-old has a part in the school play, but is experiencing stage fright and is inhibited, doesn't want to go on. What would help? What would hurt? The children discuss it amongst themselves, and then teacher helps them answer. In junior high, the question might be, your friends, junior high is just before high school, early teens. That's when children's friends become very important in their lives. And the question might be, let's say your friends are pressuring you to do something that your parents would not approve of. How can you say no and keep your friends? And that becomes the discussion. And now, Selin, if we can see the next slide, please. I'm going to tell you a quick anecdote about something that happened in New England. I don't know if it snows where you live. It snows where I live and where this kid lived. This is a 5-year-old child. It's a snowy day. He's home and he asks his mom, can I go out and play? And his mom says, sure, just put on your snowsuit. The minute she says, put on your snowsuit, this 5-year-old has a tantrum. He's screaming, he's crying, no, I won't do it, I won't do it. Then all of a sudden, he quiets down, goes to his room, in a few minutes comes back with his snowsuit on, ready to go out and play. His mom says, hey, what just happened? He says, oh, my guard dog got upset. So I had my wise owl talk to it. This is brain science for a 5-year-old. It's talking about basically 2 parts of the brain that are shown here. One is the prefrontal cortex. This is the part of the brain that thinks, that plans, that makes good decisions, that learns. It's us at our best. Then there's the emotional centers. This is what caused the tantrum. They're more or less between the ears. The amygdala is part of the salience network. It looks, for example, for things that it likes a lot or that upset it. And the brain is designed so that the amygdala, when it gets upset, or this emotional circuitry rather, can take over and freeze the prefrontal cortex. This is called an emotional hijack. And when that happens, attention fixates on the threat. And this might mean, for example, that a child at school who's worried about a bully who's threatened to beat him up can only think about that. It's not paying attention to what the teacher is saying or what it should be learning from books. Memory reshuffles. There's a memory hierarchy, and you, during the hijack, recall only what reinforces the hijack, not what counters it. And then you react with an overlearned habit. And for that child, it was the tantrum. It's even worse because the emotional circuitry gets a fuzzy picture of what's actually going on, and it makes snap decisions. You know, in our early history, this probably was useful, but today it gets us in trouble because we're reacting to symbolic threats, not real ones, you know. There are three signs, by the way, of a hijack. One, it's a very quick feeling, takes you by surprise. The second, it's typically a negative emotion. I'm very angry or I'm very anxious. And the key sign is that when it's all over, you feel badly, you regret what you said or did. That's the operational definition of a hijack. The good news is that, you know, we can all have bad news. We can all have hijacks at any point in life. The good news is that emotional intelligence is when the circuitry in the prefrontal cortex manages better the emotional circuitry. Emotional intelligence means the smooth interaction. So let me take you through a typical curriculum of SEL for this particular skill, which is a combination of self-awareness and self-regulation. You could call it the key to self-discipline. So I'm going to be referring to the statewide standards of Illinois because they mandate SEL now in every classroom. So in the early elementary years, say ages 5 to 8, the goal is that children demonstrate control of impulsive behavior. This is aided, by the way, by something called the 5 to 7 shift. This is a phenomena where the circuitry that can manage impulse increases in children's brain. And you see it dramatically in the difference between how, say, someone who's 6 behaves compared to someone who's 8 or 9, because the 8 or 9-year-old can manage. So in late elementary school, the goal is to describe and demonstrate ways to express emotions in a socially acceptable manner, to let people know you're angry, but not by yelling or shouting or hitting, but rather by saying, you know, I'm feeling pretty anxious or pretty angry now. In middle school or junior high, say ages 12 to 14, the goal is to apply strategies to manage stress and to motivate successful performance. Both of these hinge on circuitry that comes online in earlier life. And then in high school, the goal might be to analyze how your thoughts and your emotions affect your decision-making and to be responsible. This is often talked about in science circles as manifesting cognitive control. I first witnessed how you teach this to children in SEL when I went to a school in a very impoverished part of New York City. And I had learned that children in the classroom, about half of them had what's called attentional deficit disorder, hyperactivity. I assumed that the classroom would be very chaotic, but it wasn't. Children were very calm, very focused. I asked the teacher why, and she said, well, I think this is part of why. Watch this. And they did what they call belly buddies. Each child, one by one, got their favorite stuffed animal, lay down on the rug, put the animal on their belly, and watched it rise on the in-breath and fall on the out-breath. Rise on the in-breath, fall on the out-breath. When their mind wandered off, and they noticed it wandered off, they brought it back. And again, started with the next breath, watching it rise and fall. This is a basic exercise in attentional control, which also, because the way the brain is wired, helps you be calm and clear. So it helps children be focused on what they have to learn. In a study done in Dunedin, New Zealand, I think it's maybe the second largest city in New Zealand, there's a university there, and they tracked every child born in that city for a year. They tracked them between ages 4 and 8. And one of the tests they gave them was called the marshmallow test. Marshmallows are sweets. And for 4-year-olds, this was a study done at Stanford, you can put a marshmallow in front of a child and say, I'm going to go do an errand, I'll come back in few minutes, if you don't eat this marshmallow, you'll get 2 when I come back. And then they leave the room. And what they found was there's some children who have essentially good cognitive control. They don't eat the marshmallow, they get the reward, the 2 later. And about a third of kids have that, and about a third grab the marshmallow. The rest are in between. And they track them down in Dunedin after testing cognitive control in many different ways. They tested them between ages of 4 and 8. They tracked them down when they're in their 30s and later, and they found that if you had good cognitive control as a child, you had better financial success in your 30s and 40s. You had better health. You're much less likely to have a criminal record. Very strong data. And it turned out that if you didn't have good cognitive control at age 4, but you got it by age 8, you had the same outcomes, which is critical. What it suggests is that these skills, this skill set is learnable, and we can teach it to children, and I believe we should. Selin, the next slide, please. This is a different way of looking at the relationship between performance and what's happening in the brain, particularly cortisol, which is a hormone that gets us up in the morning. But when we're stressed, cortisol and adrenaline can be debilitating. So if you look to the far right, when those brain chemicals are very high, you see what technically is called a state of frazzle. And this means that you have a constant hijack and you never allow yourself to recover. It's just constant. Maybe it's from work, maybe it's from your home life, but it doesn't let up. And basically people become emotionally exhausted, sometimes burn out completely. On the other hand, if your motivation is too low at work, you're bored, or in life, you're bored. And this shows up, for example, in what's called in the States quiet quitting, people doing just the bare minimum in their job to keep it, but not doing their best. Where you want to be, and you want students to be, and you want anyone who's working to be, is at the peak of this chart, which I'm calling optimal. I have a new book called Optimal out in January, which goes into this in more detail. So when you're in your optimal zone, and it's not just at the top, I'd say it's maybe the top third of both of those arcs. You're performing at your best. You feel satisfied with how you're doing. You feel engaged in what you're doing. You have small wins, which are creative insights toward a larger goal. You feel good, and you feel connected to the people you work with. And one pathway into optimal is focus. And that's what they were teaching those children. That was an intentional exercise, and I think it should be part of any SEL. Now, Selin, the next slide, please. These are competencies that distinguish star performers that are based on the self-awareness and self-management part of emotional intelligence. So one is self-awareness. I'll go through each of these one by one quickly. I know about a brilliant corporate lawyer who unfortunately had a brain tumor in the prefrontal area, which was operated on successfully, happily. But after the surgery, it was puzzling. He was as good as ever on every test of attention and memory, but he couldn't do his job anymore. Actually, he lost his job, couldn't do any job. His wife left him. He ended up living in his brother's spare bedroom and went to Antonio Damasio, a very famous neurologist who's now at the University of Southern California. And he said to Damasio, who's an expert on the circuitry around the prefrontal cortex, he said, "What's wrong with me?" At first, Damasio was really puzzled. Excuse me. He had no idea, but then he got a clue. He asked the lawyer, "When should we have our next appointment?" And the lawyer could tell him the rational pros and cons of every hour for the next 2 weeks, but he didn't know which is best. And Damasio says, as we think about a decision, our emotional centers and deeper centers in the brain valence for us what's a good idea and what's a bad idea. This helps us make a good decision. He said the lawyer no longer had a connection to that part of the brain, so he didn't know it. Damasio calls messages from this lower part of the brain somatic markers, and he says these help guide us through life. And it's interesting, there was another study done actually at the University of Southern California of entrepreneurs who built a huge business from nothing. And they were asked how they made their business decisions. They said basically the same thing. I gather information widely, far wider than most people would think was relevant. But then they said, I check it against my gut feeling. That's the somatic marker. And if it doesn't feel right, I won't go ahead with the deal. This may mean maybe you can't trust the other people. You get a funny feeling about that. It's not anything that's you can put in a decision tree. There's no metric for it, but you get a gut feeling, and that's very, very important. Now let's talk about self-management or self-discipline, as you might call it. The key here is maintaining emotional balance. This is a way of talking about resilience or cognitive control, being able to manage your disruptive emotions and make sure that they don't get in the way of your focusing on what matters right now. This is critical for anyone, for a school student, but for anyone in work too. But also self-management means more than just keeping disruptive emotions under control. There's adaptability, being agile, being able to handle whatever comes along. And it turns out that Richard Boyatzis, my colleague at Case Western Reserve University, who teaches emotional intelligence to his MBA students and has them work on it, he found that people who in graduate school were very adaptable, and there's a measure for emotional intelligence, later in life, when they're tracked down, were the most satisfied with their careers, most satisfied with their life. Then there's achievement orientation. This means keeping your eye on the most important goal. I talked about how in an optimal state, you have small wins toward that goal, meaning every day you do something, or on a good day, you do something that helps you further reach that goal. And then finally, there's positive outlook. This is sometimes called a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. If you have a fixed mindset, you see yourself and other people as unable to change. You're just as good as you'll just be as good as you are right now. If you have a growth mindset, you see that you and other people can get better. Now, if we can have the next slide. This is a heuristic. This is not anatomically correct, nor was the other one, but just to give you the idea that this comes from what's called now social neuroscience, that brains connect, and they connect in ways that are automatic, spontaneous, and unconscious. One of the first findings in this, and this may be a legend, I don't know, but there was a lab in Italy that was not studying the social brain. That didn't exist as a field then. They were studying one brain cell, one neuron, that activated when a monkey raised its arm. And one day the brain cell was firing and the monkey wasn't moving at all. And they were very puzzled. What's going on? And then they realized, well, it was a hot day in Italy. Lab assistant had gone out for a gelato. He's standing in front of the monkey's cage. And every time the lab assistant raised his arm to take a lick of that ice cream, the neuron in the monkey for the same movement fired. This was the discovery of what are now called mirror neurons, which seem to pepper the human brain, telling us what the other person is doing, intending, and also what they're feeling. It's not the only circuit in the social brain, At Harvard Business School, they did a study of doctors and patients, and they filmed them in a session while they're recording their physiology. And then they asked the patient after the session to look over the session video and to say when they felt the doctor understood them and was really listening, really empathizing, and when they felt the doctor wasn't really caring or paying attention. And what they found was that when the patient said the doctor wasn't tuned in, didn't get me, their physiology was independent, but when the patient said the doctor really heard me, really understood, their physiology was like two birds flying in formation. It was just in harmony. And this suggests, again, that there is this brain-to-brain connection going on here. A key finding comes out of Yale at the School of Management, where Segal Barsadi, in a series of studies, showed that when the leader of a team or a group, or you can say when the teacher in a classroom or a doctor and a patient, when the most powerful person is upset, people on that team or in that group or in that classroom catch that mood and their performance goes down. When the leader of the group is feeling pretty good, pretty enthusiastic, positive mood, people catch that mood, performance goes up. In other words, emotions are contagious. They seem to be contagious largely through the social brain. And now, Selen, my last slide, which shows the social skill set of emotional intelligence and the competencies that you find in star performers that are based on each part. Empathy, I want to talk first about empathy. There are three kinds of empathy, according to the work of Jean Dissetti at the University of Chicago. They're each based on an actually different circuitry of the brain. One is cognitive empathy. I know how you feel because, I know how you think. I know the perspective you take. I know the language you use to tell yourself about reality. And I can use those terms to be effective in communicating to you because I know what you'll understand. The second ability is emotional empathy. This is probably a social brain manifestation. It means I know what you feel because I feel it too. But the third kind of empathy is relatively little understood. It's technically called empathic concern. It means not only that do I know how you think and how you feel, I care about you. I'm concerned about you. I want what's best for you. This seems to partake of the mammalian caretaking circuitry. It's like a parent's love for a child. But in a leader at work or in a teacher in school, it means you want what's best for the student, or you want what's best for the person who's working for you. And that builds enormous trust. This can be cultivated. At the University of Wisconsin, they developed a curriculum, they call it the kindness curriculum for preschoolers. And they found that preschoolers who had gone through this curriculum, which emphasizes being kind, were not competitive or kind of me first by the time they got to school. They wanted the group to do better. And at IB schools, I've worked with them on what's called compassionate systems thinking, caring about the earth, caring about climate, caring about what's best for us all. And let me wrap up and say that influence is what it sounds like, being able to persuade people, but it builds on trust. Being a coach and mentor means you care about the person. Conflict management means you can bring up simmering conflicts before they explode and find a win-win way of working it out. Teamwork means you work well on a team, that you help people have a sense of belonging. And then inspirational leadership means you can articulate a shared mission that moves people to do their best. And now the resources slide, if you will, and then we'll have some question Q&A. I have an online course in emotional intelligence. You can get at Keystep Media. If you're interested in upgrading how a team works, here's the URL for that. You can contact me at danielgoleman.info, and the inventory for the competencies based on emotional intelligence is at this other URL. And now let's have some questions.
As an academic consultant of our schools, Dr. Daniel Goleman, it's truly an honor to extend our sincere thanks to you for inspiring us with your wisdom and insights. Your memorable and captivating presentation has taken us on a journey into the domain of emotional intelligence components, namely relationship management, self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and their substantial importance in our lives. And your commitment to making a positive impact on the lives of students and educators is both admirable and impressive. Thank you for generously sharing your knowledge and experience with us. And now I think we can take our questions and we can move on Q&A. Selin, yes.
Thank you, Dr. Blantinal. Ladies and gentlemen, as we navigate through this insightful webinar, we understand the importance of taking a moment to recharge. So we've seen that some people have been raising their hands. We'd appreciate if you just type your questions on the chat section so we gather them all together and ask them as much as we can. So the first question to Dr. Goleman is, from an early age, our emotions are constantly criticized by those around us. In this situation, how can we successfully become aware of our real emotions and express them in a healthy way?
I don't know about the critical surround for a child, but I would think that you can help self-awareness in a child by, for example, pointing to and praising positive things they do and feel, not just criticizing negative things. And in fact, I don't think you ought to criticize any emotion because emotions come unbidden. We don't determine what we're going to feel, how strongly we'll feel it, or when we'll feel it. The choice point is once we know what we're feeling, what do we do about it? And that's where parents can be helping children, even young children, manage their emotions better by helping them name it and think what to do. Remember that 5-year-old with the wise owl and the guard dog? That's part of helping a child have cognitive control. And parents can play a key role there.
Thank you, Dr. Goleman. Our second question is, how do educators balance assertiveness and empathy in the context of raising young people with leadership qualities?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the first part of the question.
How do educators balance assertiveness and empathy in the context of raising young people?
Oh, okay. So empathy is not the same as sympathy. You can understand what a person is feeling and care about them without being passive about it or giving it in. You can be assertive. In fact, I think a teacher should be. So you might say to someone, it seems you're feeling upset. That doesn't mean that I need to do whatever you think should help you upset. It means this is a moment for me to help you learn what you can do once you feel that way. So empathy, it's important to understand, does not just being nice. In fact, it may mean being assertive and helping a person understand that there's a better way. Next question.
You're muted.
I don't think I'm muted.
Oh, sorry, I'm sorry. The third question is, how might a focus on emotional intelligence contribute to long-term success and personal development beyond academic achievements?
That's actually what we find. When I wrote the book Emotional Intelligence in '95, there was very little direct data. It was a brand new concept. Then I became the co-director of this consortium for research on emotional intelligence. And in the book Optimal, we've pulled together 25 years of data, and it suggests that there's a very strong correlation between success in any given position and emotional intelligence. Let me put it a different way. I've gone around the world asking people to tell me about a quality of a boss they loved and a boss they hated. And it turned out that the bosses people hate working for are, you would say, kind of emotional idiots, really. They don't understand people's emotions and don't care. And that means that people, particularly talented people, are likely to leave that place.
The next question is, in the age of artificial intelligence and technological advancement, how can individuals develop emotional self-awareness, and in what ways can they protect, guard their own emotions?
So I think that the distractions of social media are growing, geometrically. It's just immense. And social media is very seductive because it's those things you like the most, and you can get them just by turning on your phone. So I think it means that self-awareness, knowing when you're being distracted, is more important than ever. And managing that by not looking at your phone every time but by staying focused on what matters is going to help. And by the way, in the last question, I should have added that emotional intelligence is learned and learnable, and you can learn it at any point in life. And the best organizations offer learning or courses in emotional intelligence that actually teach it. There's the temptation to do something quick, but it won't stick. And to actually get better at emotional intelligence, you need to practice, you need support, you need a system. And the best organizations offer that to people.
All right, so the next question is, with the Industrial Revolution school model still common today, how do we foster and effectively evaluate the development of emotional intelligence among students?
What I hear in that question is the fact that the curriculum in schools, which was originally developed in the Industrial Revolution to turn out factory workers and farm workers, has not changed that much, that the underlying deep assumptions of most schools are to foster a modicum, a level of intellectual ability, which is not particularly great, but which allows people to learn a technical skill for the workplace. And I think that that is a very old-fashioned model. And now that we understand that success demands not just IQ or technical abilities, but as well emotional intelligence, the most forward-looking schools will include that and that's what an SEL program is.
The next question is, can it be more challenging for teachers to cultivate the emotional intelligence of the Z generation as they're more self-centered and individualistic? Is it the job of more the job of parents from early years?
That experiment at Wisconsin with the kindness curriculum was really interesting because it found that in first grade and onward, students became more self-centered, cared more about themselves, became more competitive. Think about it, the difference between when a kid comes home from school, the parents say, how'd you do on the test, which is pretty standard now, versus asking the same child, who were you kind to today? That's a completely different way of thinking about or framing what school can be. And I'm not saying you don't care about the test, but you also care about the human qualities of the student. And I think that the more we can do that, the more we'll counter the trends in society that you talk about.
All right, so we have lots of questions actually. Let me see. Could our inability to recognize and manage our own emotions be the reason for which some parents and teachers fear children's expression of their emotions?
So teachers and parents should be models for children. So if you're unable to be aware of your own emotions or manage them, whether you're a parent or a teacher, I would say it's not a good example for the young people. So I think that mastering your own emotional intelligence is extremely important for passing it on to a younger generation.
How can schools involve parents in encouraging emotional intelligence and social skills among students?
How can schools help parents? Is that the question?
Yeah, and how can schools involve parents in encouraging emotional intelligence?
Sure.
And so
So typically, the way that it's done commonly is to have an evening presentation to parents where you share with them what you're doing with the kids and you encourage them to reinforce it at home. Sometimes kids come home and kind of bring emotional intelligence learning back to the family. You know, when a parent gets upset, they might say, you know, a 5-year-old might say, oh, your guard dog got upset. You should have your wise owl talk to it. I've heard many reports of that kind of reverse learning where the kid brings it to the family.
Okay, now on to the next one. What would you recommend teachers to explore the unique potentials of students from the perspective of emotional intelligence?
If you see that a student of yours is outstanding in some aspect of this, self-discipline, managing upsetting feelings, or empathy, whatever it may be, you can call the class's attention to a good example of that. You know, you can see how this child did it in the moment. And, you know, what he or she did, we should all do. I think it's that simple. It's seeing moments where a child exemplifies some good demonstration of emotional intelligence and calling attention of the whole class to it.
The next question is, if you could only give one advice when raising children, what would it be?
Be a model for your children.
The next question is, what courses do you think should be included in the curriculum of preschool or primary school children?
Well, one of the big challenges for them is mastering unruly impulses. So I would say cognitive control, anything that strengthens cognitive control. And it can be taught in many ways. Do you have the show Sesame Street in Turkey? I'm asking you. You do. So Sesame Street is very interesting because many of the skits in Sesame Street are based on lessons from cognitive scientists to the writers of Sesame Street. So, for example, one of the stories about Cookie Monster. Cookie Monster can't handle the temptation to eat a cookie. Cookie Monster just gobbles a cookie if it's around. So one of the skits showed Cookie Monster entering the Cookie Connoisseur Club, where you have to restrain yourself from eating a cookie. You examine the cookie, you sniff the cookie, and then you can take a nibble of the cookie. And he really wanted to be in the cookie club. And so in the course of the skit, he learns how to do this. And what he's doing is modeling for preschoolers cognitive control. And by the way, anytime a parent or a teacher has a young child wait and do something else before having a snack or a dessert or something, you're helping that child manifest cognitive control.
Next question is, what would your advice be on sustaining the resonance of positivity among teacher colleagues despite personality differences and self-difficulties they're experiencing?
I think the best way to maintain a positive mood in a relationship is for you yourself to be in that mood and not to worry about someone else. Remember, moods are contagious. And so if you're the head of a school, if you're a co-worker, you being optimistic or in a positive, upbeat mood is important, because relationships are dependent on the interaction between people. And so you yourself are bringing positivity by being in that state.
All right. Someone asked, how do teachers create classroom to increase self-awareness? Could you give one advice?
One of the things that is done in SEL in early grades, and the teacher here didn't say what grade, is to have what they call a sharing circle at the start of the day, where kids simply say, if they want, nobody is forced to, if they don't want, say how they feel and why they feel that way. I feel upset because my mom yelled at me at breakfast. That actually enhances self-awareness.
You mentioned EI being emphasized in the IB curriculum. Can you give some examples of EM there?
I'm sorry to say I'm not that familiar with the IB curriculum, and I know that there are many offerings that IB has for IB schools, so it may or may not manifest in what is done in any given school, but my involvement was in developing a program in what they called compassionate systems, where they taught systems thinking, but in economic systems, political systems, climate, ecological systems. But along with it, they taught concern or compassion, so that it wasn't just understanding how the system works, but can we make it work better for humanity or for the planet?
All right. Someone asked, how does self-esteem affect emotional intelligence?
I would put it the other way around. How does emotional intelligence affect self-esteem? Because I think that the causality runs that way. If you understand that you are adept at something, if you understand that you manage your emotions well, if you keep your eye on the long-term goal, you have a certain kind of confidence that means you have higher self-esteem.
If the child does not perform the desired behaviors using positive rewards, are positive punishments more useful or negative punishments?
Well, I think it's probably a combination of both. I would try rewarding good behavior, but you also want to have boundaries as a parent or teacher. You don't put up with bad behavior. You let a child know what the limits are and enforce them.
The next question is, someone asked how to support emotional intelligence development for adolescents.
You know, for adolescents, friends and peers are extremely important. And using peer influence is a very powerful way to do it. To have kids who are popular, who are admired, exemplify emotional intelligence, talk about it and how important it is. By the way, the same is true in the workplace, in an organization, in a school. The most powerful person, the principal or the high-level executive, is an important part of bringing emotional intelligence into the culture, because you want that person to talk about it and talk about how important it is. Oh, and back to the teenager situation, I think having kids talk about problems they're having with other kids and how emotional intelligence can help is very important.
The next question is, when should parents or teachers intervene in the conflict between children?
How should parents intervene?
The question is when should they, but another question is how can parents intervene? So maybe we can merge them both.
So it depends, I think, on what age you're involved with, but you can see the conflict as a learning opportunity and suggest to both sides that that maybe they can give in a little to get along with each other, because getting along is itself important to kids. Helping them understand how to get along. And this is what's called a win-win approach, where each side gives in a bit, they compromise, but they come up with a compromise where both feel, well, it's good enough, I can go along with it. That's an important lesson for kids to learn. It's a lesson for life. Have we reached the end of our time?
Maybe we could take just one question, Dr. Daniel Goleman.
Sure.
If
Okay.
it is fine to you, because
Sure.
Ayvars and Selin, we could take the maybe last one or two questions.
Surely.
All right. Let me see, because we have.
And Dr. Goleman, really, it has been a fruitful session to all of us. And the issue of that means that really we have become more intelligent when it comes to feelings and emotions.
I see. Thank you very much.
But really we face difficulties when it comes to conflict, because when we face negative conflicts during the school practices, we have to employ effective strategies to turn into positive conflict. In that sense, could you suggest one or two tips when we face negative conflicts during the school practices? How could we make?
Yeah, so the first step is master your own reaction. You don't want to add what we say in English, fuel to the fire. You don't want to make it worse, because you're very reactive too. So the first thing, manage your own emotions. Second thing, empathize with both sides.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yes. Last question.
Yes, last question.
Okay, the last question. In terms of emotional intelligence development, how would you recommend parents communicate with their children during early childhood?
How should parents communicate with their children? Is that the question?
In their early childhood.
I would say with empathy, love, and concern. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dear participants, we appreciate your thoughtful questions. Now I would like to turn the floor over to Professor Uğur Öner, the academic advisor of our school's guidance and psychological counseling services.
Yes, dear Selin and Aybars, first of all, as an educator, I find it very promising for our future to have such productive and caring young people who are active at work as you. And secondly, Dr. Goleman, I believe that turning the eyes of the world to emotions, and especially to the intelligence of emotions, is a very valuable contribution to all humanity. In this world, where we somehow suppress our emotions into emojis, I firmly believe that we need to understand emotions more than ever. In this age, where we discuss the Internet of Things, I think that understanding and expressing emotions strengthens interpersonal communication. Awareness of emotional intelligence would be the best way to create self-confident generations and happier communities. For these reasons, emotional intelligence-based school practices must be integrated into school curricula. Thank you very much again.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Good luck.
Thank you.
you,
As
Dr.
we draw
Goleman.
curtains on the... Sorry, Aybars, were you
I
saying
was
something?
gonna say, thank you, Dr. Goleman, Dr. Anesh. Thank you to all of our panelists for their contributions. And a warm thank you to all in the audience.
So as we draw the curtains on the webinar with Dr. Goleman, remember the wisdom that is shared today. Let's keep learning, stay inspired, and stay curious. Thank you all for joining. We're now ending the webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Goleman.
Yes. My pleasure. Good luck.